The hard part of the process for most people is the first 100 zalas. And if you have a standing start at zero, getting together 100 zalas is a long struggle. And for most people, and I would argue that the people who get there relatively quickly are helped if they're passionate about being rational, very eager and opportunistic, and steadily underspend their income grossly. I think those three factors are very helpful. People love to complain that making the first 100 zalas is unfairly hard. They think it's the economy, the government, the market, the interest rates, the boss, the weather, the alignment of the moon, anything but themselves. The truth is simpler and less flattering. The first 100 zalozin is hard because you are hard to deal with. Most people can't save. They can't delay gratification. They can't resist buying a nicer toy the moment their paycheck increases by 20, and they certainly can't behave rationally for more than 2 consecutive weeks. So yes, the first 100,000 is torture. It tests your self-control, your ego, American, and your ability to behave like an adult in a world built for children. But once you get it, something interesting happens. Everything gets easier. Not because the world suddenly becomes generous, but because you finally stop being your own worst enemy. I've watched this pattern, American, for almost a century. Human nature doesn't change. People think the rich have some secret. Well, they do. They learned how to keep their hands out of the cookie jar long enough for compounding to do its job. You won't like hearing this, but here it is. If you're still broke in your 30s, 40s, 50s, the odds you've been making the same dumb mistakes repeatedly, overspending, chasing feds, trying to look successful instead of becoming successful, and believing that some genius on the internet will hand you a shortcut. There's no shortcut. The first 100,000 is the proof. Warren and I talk about this number. People think we're giving them some motivational slogan. We are not. We're describing a miserable uphill climb that forges a different version of you. One who can actually handle money without doing something idiotic. Let me give you a picture. Imagine you're rolling a snowball at the very top of a long hill. You start with a handful of cold, sticky snow. It grows slightly, then melts, then grows again. And most of the time it slips between your fingers because you're not paying attention. That's the journey to 100 zalozin. Once that ball reaches a certain size, gravity finally starts working with you instead of against you. It's small at first, tiny advances you hardly notice. But 5 years later, you can't believe how heavy that snowball became. And no, that doesn't happen at 10,000 or 20,000 or 50,000. American. It happens at $100 a thousand. That's the threshold where compounding stops being theoretical and becomes emotional. You finally feel its weight. You stop rolling the snowball because you suddenly want to. You roll it because now it would be stupid to stop. And that's the moment everything changes. I've seen kids in their early 20s figure this out faster than people in their 50s. The difference, the kids behaved rationally earlier. They underspent their income grossly. They didn't need a new car every 3 years to soothe their fragile egos. They didn't try to impress people. They didn't even you want to know what the biggest financial skill is? It's not picking stocks. It's not reading balance sheets. It's not forecasting interest rates. Good heavens, 99% of the world does that poorly anyway. The real skill is avoiding stupidity long enough to let compounding reward you. That means spend less than you earn, save consistently, invest in something you understand, stop jumping in and out of markets like a hyperactive squirrel. And most of all, ignore the noise. This is where most people fail. They want excitement. They want entertainment. They want every dollar to feel like a lottery ticket. Well, the world punishes people like that. It always has. Do you think I became wealthy because I found magical opportunities unavailable to everyone else? Hardly. I simply behaved less foolishly for a longer period of time, and I didn't spend money. I didn't have a radical concept, apparently. But once you reach that first 100 zalozin, you start seeing the world differently. You're no longer disparate. You're no longer emotional. You're no longer begging the market to save you. American, the money starts to work for you. You stop working for every dollar. It's a quiet shift, but it changes everything. Your patience, your judgment, your tolerance for nonsense, your view of risk. People think becoming rich requires brilliance. No, brilliance is optional, but avoiding stupidity, mandatory. If you can push through the misery of the first to $100 and you've already done something 90% of people cannot do. You've proven you can delay gratification. You've proven you can think independently. You've proven you can sit still while the world chases distractions. And you've proven you don't need applause to stay disciplined. The market rewards that. Life rewards that. And compounding, well, compounding is the most loyal servant you'll ever have, but it only serves the people patient enough to let it live. So when you hear me say that everything gets easier after the first 100 zeros, and don't imagine some magical transformation. Imagine a person who finally stopped shooting himself in the foot, because that's what wealth really is, a long period of not doing dumb things. Now, I'm American, and let's talk about the real question. How do you actually get there without wasting 20 years making the usual mistakes? That's what the next part is about. Most people think they're failing financially because the world is unfair. And yes, the world is unfair, but that's not why they're broke. They're broke because they behave in ways that guarantee they will stay broke, and they do it consistently, stubbornly, almost proudly. Let me walk you through the real reasons people never reach 100 zalos, and even they live in the richest era in human history. Reason number one, People hate boredom. Getting to 100,000 requires years of doing the same dull, responsible actions over and over again. Save, invest, repeat. No fireworks, no drama, no dopamine hits. Most people would rather chase excitement than progress. They won't stick with the boring habits required to build wealth because boredom feels like punishment to them. Well, guess what? Wealthy people tolerate boredom better than average people tolerate a mild inconvenience. That's the truth no one likes. Reason number 2, people think discipline is optional. They want the lifestyle of a disciplined person without the discipline. They want the results of saving without the saving. They want the returns of investing without investing. They want the independence of wealth without the sacrifice required to earn it. Life does not work that way. Never has, never will. People imagine that wealthy individuals won some intellectual lottery. Wrong. They simply acted rationally longer than others could stand to. Reason number 3, people refuse to learn what they need to know. I've met countless young people who can spend 6 hours researching a new phone, but they won't spend 1 hour learning how compounding works. They know the specs of a gadget far better than the cash flow statement of a company they're investing in. If you treat your financial education like an optional hobby, you will remain a financial amateur your entire life. And amateurs don't accumulate 100,000, they accumulate debt. Reason number 4, people want approval. This one ruins more financial futures than inflation, recessions, and high interest rates combined. People overspend on cars to impress people who don't care. They upgrade apartments just to look successful. They buy clothes, gadgets, vacations, and subscriptions to keep up with peers they secretly envy. They would rather appear rich than become rich. American, I grew up in the era of the Great Depression. In 1930, nobody admired you for spending money. The culture rewarded thrift, restraint, caution. People were proud of saving. Today, people are proud of treating themselves, which usually means sabotaging their own future for 5 minutes of artificial pleasure. When the desire for approval controls you, your path to 100,000 is dead on arrival. Reason number 5, people think the market owes them something. They complain that wages are too low, stocks too high, housing is unaffordable, and opportunities are rare. And while some of that is true, complaining won't fix anything. People forget that Warren started with 10,000 in 1951. Adjusted for inflation, it wasn't much. But he behaved rationally, lived modestly, American, and found opportunities others ignored. People always say that was easier back then. No, it was never easy. It was simply possible just like it is today. Reason number 6, people want an easy hero to follow. Most people want someone else to take responsibility for their financial decisions. A guru, a newsletter, a TikTok personality, magical stock picker, anyone who can save them from thinking for themselves. That's why the world is full of questionable investment advice. There's a massive market for people who want to outsource judgment. But here's the truth, Warren, and I learned early, nobody is going to hand you your first 100,000, not your broker, not your favorite YouTuber, not your business school professor, and certainly not your neighbor who swears he's found the next big trend. If you achieve the first 100,000, it's because you did the work, not because you found a genius to idolize. Reason number 7, people can't ignore noise. Every time markets fall, people panic. Every time markets rise, they foam into idiotic assets. They change strategies like they change their shirts. You cannot build 100,000 this way. You can barely survive this way. The market rewards calm, rational people, not hyperactive daydreamers who treat investing like a casino. And the last reason, the one nobody wants to acknowledge, reason number 8, people lie to themselves. They say they're trying. They say they're saving. They say they're serious about money, but their actions tell a different story. They have subscriptions they forgot about. They order takeout like royalty. They deserve weekend spending sprees. They don't track expenses. They don't plan ahead. American, they lie to themselves because the truth is painful. They want the rewards of sacrifice without the sacrifice itself. If you want to reach 100,000, the first thing you must kill is the comfortable lie. And here's why this matters so much. Once you stop lying to yourself, American, and you finally gain the clarity required to build wealth, you become immune to nonsense. You stop chasing shortcuts and you realize the problem was never the economy. The problem was your behavior. When you fix that, compounding finally has a chance to work. And once compounding works, the hill gets less steep every year. That's the secret most people never learn. And that's why they never reach 100,000. People love to make wealth emotional. They talk about mindset, abundance, unlocking potential, and other soft nonsense that sounds pleasant but accomplishes nothing. Wealth is not emotional. Wealth is arithmetic. Very simple arithmetic that doesn't care about how motivated you feel on a Tuesday morning. If you want 100,000, there's a brutal equation behind it. And whether you like it or not, the numbers always win. Let's start with something painfully obvious. You need to earn more than you spend, and you must invest the difference. For a very long time, this sounds like common sense, but common sense becomes surprisingly rare when lifestyle inflation shows up. Let me give you an example. A young person earns $40 in a year. Not great, not terrible, perfectly workable. If they save 10%, which is already more disciplined than most display, they keep $4,000. They invested in something sensible that returns, say, 8% annually. After 10 years, they barely cross 60,000. Now, Watch what happens when they behave like adults instead of enthusiastic consumers. If they save 25% just by avoiding luxuries they can't afford, that's $10,000 a year. Over 10 years with average returns, they reach under $50. Same income, Zama world, different behavior, different outcome. This is the brutality of math. It rewards discipline and punishes excuses. People hate hearing this because it removes their favorite scapegoat, some mysterious external force is supposedly blocking their progress. Life is expensive, yes. So stop making it more expensive. I deserve nice things, sure. Later, after the compounding machine is working, I can't save that much, then you're choosing not to reach 100,000 and don't pretend it's impossible. I've met people during the 1970s when inflation was chewing through savings like a termite colony who still managed to build wealth. They simply refused to act like the world owed them comfort. They lived modestly. They invested early. They didn't complain every time the market coughed. The math was the same then. The math is the same now. It will be the same in 2073. Arithmetic is eternal. Your feelings come and go. Another brutal truth. It's not the return rate that kills you. It's the stupidity rate. You don't need 15% annual returns. You don't need to find the next Apple. American, you don't need to speculate in cryptocurrencies, fluctuate like a toddler's emotions. You just need to avoid these wealth destroying habits. Selling everything when the market dips, buying everything when friends brag, borrowing for junk you don't need, investing in things you understand, following investment influencers who can barely manage their own finances, jumping into fads because you're bored, panicking because somebody on television predicted a recession. You don't fail to reach 100,000 because the returns were too low. You fail because you behave like a lunatic during the process. Avoid stupidity and the math will take care of the rest. Let's talk about compounding. Compounding is a funny thing. People hear about it. They nod politely. They pretend they understand. They don't feel it until their savings hit six figures. The 10,000 compounding feels like watching paint dry. It barely moves. You feel cheated as if the universe is withholding your prosperity. But 100,000 compounding now, you finally feel the gravitational pull at 8% annual growth. 100,000 quietly becomes 200,000 in less time than it took you to earn the first 100,000. That's why the first 100,000 is the hardest. It's where you're doing the heavy lifting with your own muscles. After that, capital does most of the work. Another point people overlook, you need to invest your money where stupidity has less opportunity to ruin things. This is why Warren and I stayed in our circle of competence. We didn't chase every shiny thing. We ignored 9 out of 10 opportunities. We focused on simple businesses with strong moats and reasonable valuations. Not because we were conservative, but because we were rational. The first $100 is where most people blow themselves up trying to go faster. They want a shortcut, so they take risks they don't understand. And then when they lose money, they blame the market instead of their own impatience. Let me tell you a secret that nobody in financial marketing wants you to know. You don't need a genius strategy to build $100,000. You just need to avoid being an idiot for long enough. I've known many people who were geniuses on paper, financially hopeless in real life. They can solve equations that would make your head spin, yet they can't save few thousand a year because they lack the basic discipline of saying no to themselves. Meanwhile, the consistent plotter, the quiet person with no ego, reaches 100,000 sooner simply because they didn't spend their life pretending to be clever. Life rewards the disciplined much more than it rewards the brilliant. That's the part of the equation people hate the most. It makes wealth accessible to everyone, which means most people have no excuse. If you want to reach 100,000 without losing your mind, recognize this truth. Your income matters far less than your behavior. People earning modest salaries hit six figures because they avoid lifestyle creep. People earning high salaries stay broke because they can't stop lighting money on fire. It's not glamorous. It's not inspirational, but it's the truth. The math is brutal. The math is simple. And the math doesn't care about your feelings. Once you accept that, you finally start playing the game correctly. In the next part, I'll tell you the one habit that separates people who actually reach 100,000 from those who talk about it for decades without getting anywhere. People like to imagine that wealth comes from brilliance, insight, or some genetic blessing that only a chosen few receive. But if you force me to identify one habit, just one that separates people who get to 100,000 from people who talk about getting to 100,000, is this relentless, almost boring consistency. No passion, not intensity, not grinding, not hustle culture, just steady, disciplined, unromantic consistency. People don't like hearing this because it lacks drama. It doesn't give them an excuse, and it certainly doesn't let them blame anyone else. But look back at anyone who quietly built wealth. They did the same thing over and over again, long after the average person would have quit out of boredom, frustration, or sheer impatience. Let me tell you something I learned in the 1940s while studying law and delivering big sacks of mail to make a living. You don't have to be the smartest man in the room. You just have to be the one who doesn't stop. Most people stop, and they stop for stupid reasons. They save for 3 months and feel deprived. So they reward themselves. They invest for 1 year. The market dips and they panic. They follow a budget for a bit, then forget it exists. They start learning about businesses, then chase the next distraction a week later. American, consistency is the graveyard where most good intentions go to die. The people who reach 100,000 are the ones who treat their financial behavior like brushing their teeth. They do it automatically without negotiating with themselves. Let's break down why consistency works and why almost everyone fails at it. Reason one, consistency removes emotion from the equation. If you rely on motivation, you're doomed. Motivation is unstable. It fades the moment life gets inconvenient. Consistency turns money management into a mechanical process. You save on the first of the month. You invest on the 15th. You ignore every distraction in between. You don't ask, do I feel like saving today? That's a childish question. Adults don't negotiate with their obligations. Reason two, consistency compounds. You don't just compound dollars. You compound discipline. The act of saving gets easier. The urge to spend gets weaker. The noise of the market becomes irrelevant. The habit becomes identity. You go from a person trying to save money to a person who doesn't tolerate financial stupidity. I've watched young people transform their entire lives with this habit, not because they increased their income, though many eventually did, but because they became the type of person who can be trusted with money. That alone puts you miles ahead of everyone else. Reason three, consistency exposes distractions for what they are, expensive nonsense. Let me tell you something Warren and I learned early. Almost every financial mistake comes from a moment of excitement, panic, envy, or ego. People join the latest investment fad because they're excited. They dump a long-term investment because they're panicking. They overspend because they feel envious. They take foolish risks because their ego demands admiration. Consistency kills all these impulses. When you have a routine you follow no matter what's happening in the world. You stop behaving like a weather vane. You stop reacting emotionally to every headline. You stop letting the manic depressive nature of markets control your brain. This is what intelligent investing actually looks like. Quiet, consistent, slightly boring behavior. The young people who become wealthy aren't the ones shouting about opportunities. They're the ones quietly buying solid investments month after month, year after year. The world doesn't notice them until they're rich. Then everyone calls them lucky. Reason four, consistency forces you to accept responsibility. When you decide to behave consistently, you lose your favorite escape hatch, blame. Most people love blaming external circumstances. It lets them stay broke without facing the consequences of their decisions. Consistency removes excuses. If you save every month, it's your decision. If you overspend every month, it's also your decision. If you invest in foolish things, there's no guru left to blame. People avoid consistency because they avoid responsibility. Responsibility exposes weakness. Consistency eliminates the comforting fiction that something out there is the problem. This is why reaching 100,000 isn't just a financial achievement. It's a psychological transformation. You stop being a victim of circumstances and start being the architect of your own behavior. Reason five, consistency survives reality. Life will punch you in the face guaranteed. Cars break, kids get sick, jobs disappear, market dip, emergencies show up at the worst possible time. People who lack consistency collapse at the first sign of disruption. They abandon the plan. They stop saving. They panic and sell. They revert to old habits. People with consistency adapt. They keep the habit alive even if they have to shrink it temporarily. They save less, but they save. They invest less, but they invest. They move slower, but they never stop. And because they never stop, they eventually reach 100,000 and go far beyond it. Let me give you a simple comparison. Person A saves 300 a month for 10 years without interruption. Person B saves 0 for 5 months, 500 during a motivated month, and nothing again because life got busy. Person A gets rich. Person B stays frustrated not because of intelligence, not because of opportunity, but because of consistency. People love to glamorize wealth. You prefer to demystify it. Reaching 100,000 is not a triumph of genius or luck. It's a triumph of dull, repetitive, borderline, unexciting behavior performed for many years without whining. That's all. The first, a 100,000 isn't for the clever. It's for the consistent. In the next part, I'll tell you why your circle of competence matters even at the early stages and why wandering outside it is the fastest way to sabotage your snowball before it ever gets rolling. Most people fail to reach 100,000 for a very simple reason. They invest in things they do not understand and then act surprised when the outcome is disastrous. This isn't a mystery. It's what happens when curiosity outpaces competence. The world is full of people who think they're savvy investors because they watched 3 YouTube videos, glanced at a stock chart, or memorized buzzwords like disruption, AI, or innovative platform. They have no idea what they're buying, no idea what drives a business. No idea why the price moves. They're tourists in a dangerous neighborhood and they want applause for wandering around blindfolded. Before you reach 100,000, your circle of competence is the only real defense you have. Your portfolio is tiny. Your margin for error is microscopic. Cushion is now 1 mistake can set you back 3 years. 2 mistakes can wipe out half a decade. And the worst mistake of all is pretending to know what you don't know. Warren and I learned this lesson early, very early. When you're poor, ignorance isn't just expensive. It's fatal. Let me give you a historical example because people love to romanticize the past. When Warren discovered Jayco in January of 1951, he didn't buy it because it had a cool story. He bought it because he understood insurance better than almost any other 20-year-old alive at the time. Why? Because he spent his time reading annual reports, studying underwriting, and analyzing loss ratios instead of chasing whatever nonsense his peers were excited about. Jayco wasn't a lucky guess. It was a logical conclusion inside a well-defined circle of competence. Meanwhile, he visited a few respected firms, insurance analysts, who told him he didn't know what he was told him he didn't know what he was talking about. The experts laughed at him. He ignored them correctly because American, when you actually understand something, outside opinions matter far less. You aren't dependent on applause to act rationally. Now, look at what people do today. They buy things because someone on Twitter posted a rocket emoji. A friend bragged about doubling his money. A stranger on social media made a confident prediction. An influencer promised guaranteed passive income. They don't want to feel left out. They're desperate for fast results. They believe they're smarter than they actually are. None of these behaviors belong inside the circle of competence. They belong inside a casino, and people wonder why they never reach 100 Zalozans. Let me explain what a circle of competence really is. It's not a list of industries you like. It's not a set of companies you heard good things about. It's not something you invent to sound intelligent. Circle of competence is the narrow domain where your understanding is deep enough, rational enough, and honest enough that you can make decisions without fooling yourself. It's defined by clarity, not confidence. Confidence is cheap. Every fool has it. Clarity is rare. And clarity requires saying the three words that terrify most people. I don't know. If you can say, I don't know more often and mean it, you're already wealthier in judgment than 90% of the population. The people who reach 100,000 faster aren't the ones who know the most. America, they're the ones who avoid what they don't know. Avoidance is underrated. Not doing stupid things is often more important than doing smart things. Before you have a large portfolio, your job is not to conquer the financial world. Your job is to avoid stepping on landmines. And most landmines are disguised as opportunities. People love wandering into areas they don't understand because ego whispers, don't worry, you're smart enough. Well, I've met enough smart people to tell you intelligence is often a liability. The smarter the person, the more creative their self-deception. A smart person can justify anything. A rational person refuses to. Let me put it bluntly. If you don't understand how a business actually makes money, you shouldn't own its stock. If you don't understand what drives risk, you shouldn't take the risk. If you don't understand the mechanics of an asset, the market will happily teach you the hard way. And the market's tuition fees are not cheap. People say, but Charlie, how do I expand my circle of competence? Slowly, carefully, rationally read annual reports, study businesses, learn counting, observe industries for years, not hours. Find companies with durable moats and pricing power. Ignore anything you cannot explain in one paragraph. Your goal is not to know everything. Your goal is to know a few things deeply and avoid everything else like plague. Warren likes to say the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be broken. Well, ignorance works the same way. A few sloppy decisions don't feel dangerous until they compound, and suddenly you're 45 with no savings and still blaming the economy. The first 100, 1,000 is the point where you cannot afford sloppy decisions. Your snowball is too small. It needs protection, not bravado. Your circle of competence is that protection. The world is full of complexity, noise, hype, and clever marketing designed to separate you from your money. Sticking to what you understand is not cowardice. It's intelligence. It's discipline. It's survival. If you want to know the real reason most people never reach $100, don't look at their bank accounts. Look at their envy. Envy is the most expensive emotion in human nature. It destroys more fortunes in recessions, inflation, taxes, market crashes combined. And people fall for it with a level of enthusiasm normally reserved for lottery winnings. Let me tell you something simple that most adults never mature enough to understand. You cannot build wealth while keeping score against other people. That's because envy always forces you to violate rational behavior. Always, not sometimes, always. Let me paint the picture. Your friend makes money on some speculative garbage. He tells you he doubled his account in 2 months. He brags about it over dinner, posts about it online, and behaves like a miniature Rockefeller. You feel small, you feel behind, you feel like you missed something. So what do? You chase something else you don't understand just to catch up. This is how envy works. It pushes you from rational behavior towards stupid behavior in one jump. People hate hearing this, but I'll say it anyway. You don't envy people because they're ahead of you. You envy them because you lack a plan. When you have a plan, when you're marching toward 100,000 with discipline, someone else's temporary success doesn't bother you. When you don't have a plan, every idiot with a short-term win becomes a threat to your ego. And ego is the fastest way to empty your pockets. Let me give you an example from the 1990s. Tech stocks were flying. Every cab driver had a stock tip. Every amateur thought they were a genius. The envy in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. People abandoned rational investing and jumped into absurd companies with no earnings and no real products. Why? Because their neighbor made 50,000 overnight and they couldn't stomach being left behind. Then 2000 hit, reality reappeared, the market crashed, the hot stocks imploded. People lost fortunes that took decades to build. They weren't victims of the market. They were victims of envy. I've seen this cycle repeat over and over. Again, 1873, 1929, 1989, 1987, 2000, 2008, 2021. People always think their era is special. It never is. Human nature is. The constant in envy is its most predictable glitch. You want to know how Warren and I lasted so long in the market. We were immune to envy. We didn't envy the traders making money faster. We didn't envy the people bragging about their hot tips. We didn't envy the rising stars who blew up just as quickly as they rose. We simply didn't play their game. The funniest part, envy is a completely irrational emotion. You're jealous of someone else's results, but you don't want their process, their risk, their stress, or their losses. You only want their highlight reel. That's why envy is the dumbest of the sins. As I once said, at least gluttony tastes good. Envy gives you nothing, absolutely nothing. Accept the urge to destroy your own progress. People say, Charlie, how do I stop being envious? And my answer is both honest and unpleasant. Grow up. Envy is emotional immaturity masquerading as financial frustration. The moment you behave like an adult instead of a teenager with a fragile ego, envy loses its power. Here's a quiet truth wealthy people understand. Wealth is not a race. It's a solo climb. Your pace matters. Your consistency matters. Your discipline might tear. Other people's results don't. When you obsess over someone else's path, you wander off your own, and wandering is expensive. Another reason envy destroys people is this. Envy amplifies risk taking. If you're behind envy whispers, take a shortcut, take more risk, swing for the fences, bet. But the first 100,000 is not the time for heroics. It's the time for survival. When your snowball is small, the only thing that matters is avoiding stupid mistakes. Envy creates those mistakes. You can't reach 100,000 if you keep blowing yourself up to impress people who don't care. Let me tell you a story from the early Berkshire days. We bought See's candies for $25 million in 1972. A lot of people laughed thinking candy was a silly business. They envied the sexier investments of the time, technology, oil, speculative mining. Well, CES ended, generating over $2 billion in earnings for Berkshire. Meanwhile, the glamorous companies everyone envied disappeared. That's the difference between envy and rationality. Envy chases glamour. Rationality chases value. Most people don't reach 100,000 because they would rather look impressive than be impressive. They care more about status than security, about speed than longevity. But your job is not to keep up. Your job is to stay alive financially long enough for compounding to show up. Envy shortens your timeline. Discipline lengthens it. If you want 100,000, and you must kill the urge to compete with other people's noise. Stay in your lane, build quietly. Ignore the flamboyant circus of bragging and speculation. In the next part, I'll tell you the second most destructive trait, overconfidence, why people sabotage their press the moment they make a little money. If envy is the emotion that pushes people into stupidity, overconfidence is the one that convinces them. Stupidity is brilliance, and nothing destroys a small snowball faster than a person who thinks they're a genius after one lucky roll. Let me tell you something blunt. The moment you start feeling smart, the market starts preparing your punishment. I've seen this pattern for decades. People work hard, save consistently, invest carefully, then their portfolio grows to 20,000, maybe 30,000, and suddenly they believe they've cracked the secrets of the universe. They think they're Warren Buffett's long-lost cousin. They think they can outsmart professionals with 50 years of experience. They think they've figured out the system. No, they've merely been lucky during a stretch of benign weather. Overconfidence is dangerous because it masquerades as competence. It feels like insight. It feels like intuition. It feels like intelligence. It is none of those things. It is ego with lipstick. Let me paint the typical scenario. A young person invests in a bull market. Stocks rise because the entire economy is rising. Instead of saying, I got a bit lucky, they say, I have a talent for this. Then they start doing what every overconfident amateur does. They take bigger risks. They abandon the plan that was working. They chase more volatile assets. They ignore valuation entirely. They think diversification is for cowards. They confuse luck with skill. Soon they're holding a portfolio that resembles a grenade collection, and eventually one of the grenades explodes. This is why most people never reach 100,000. They sabotage their own progress the minute they experience a small win. Let me remind you of something essential. The early wins are never proof of intelligence. They're only proof that you haven't met real risk yet. The stock market is kind of in its early stages. It lets beginners taste victory long enough to inflate their egos. Then once the ego is fully inflated, boom, confidence becomes overconfidence. Overconfidence becomes recklessness. Recklessness becomes a financial obituary, Warren. And I have seen this movie thousands of times. Different faces, same ending. During the 1980s, commodity prices boomed. Farmers, truck drivers, construction workers, they all thought they were financial prodigies. They borrowed money to speculate on futures they didn't understand. Some made a fortune for about 15 minutes. Then the cycle turned and their fortunes vanished faster than they appeared. Overconfidence is expensive. Humility is profitable. And no, humility doesn't mean thinking poorly of yourself. It means recognizing reality. You don't know nearly as much as you think you do. Neither do we. That's why we avoid most opportunities. The world sees Warren and me as masters of investing. What the world doesn't notice is how many things we don't touch. We pass on 90% of ideas. We ignore entire categories. We refuse to speculate in areas where clarity is low. Silence and restraint made us rich, not intellect to all radu. The reason amateurs get blown up is simple. They fall in love with the story of their own intelligence. They make one good trade and think they've discovered a talent that took us 50 years to develop. It's absurd. Here's a little wisdom from a long life. If you're under 100 Zalazard, you don't need confidence. You need paranoia, not panic, not fear, just a healthy suspicion of your own brilliance. The greatest investors in history all share one trait. They know what they don't know. The worst investors all share the opposite trait. They don't know what they don't know. And that ignorance combined with arrogance is deadly. Let me give you a real example. A man I once knew in Omaha went from 30,000 to 150,000 during the dot-com boom. He believed he had a special gift. He quit his job. He mortgaged his house to trade full time. He bragged endlessly about his strategy. He told his friends he'd be a millionaire in 2 years. Within 18 months, he was bankrupt. He didn't lose to the market. He lost to himself. His ego was bigger than his portfolio. And the market is a merciless teacher. When ego writes the exam before you hit your 100,000, your number one job is to avoid overconfidence. Your snowball is too small to survive stupidity. You can't afford bold bets. You can't afford flashy strategies. You can't afford to feel smart. What you can afford is humility, patience, and consistency qualities that look boring until they start printing money. You want to reach 100,000, then act like someone who understands how fragile small wealth is. Treat every dollar like it could vanish if you start behaving like a genius. Let me leave you with something I've said many times. It's not the smart who get rich. It's the rational. Rational people don't get cocky after a few small wins. They tighten their discipline. They protect their snowball. They ignore bragging. They stay within their circle of competence. And they grow wealth almost accidentally because they avoided the idiocy that destroys most people. In the next part, we will bring everything together and talk about how your life changes after you finally reach 100,000 and why the world suddenly feels easier, even though nothing around you actually changed. People think reaching 100,000 changes your life because the money itself is life changing. It isn't. Not really. To 100,000 won't buy you a mansion. It won't buy you a yacht. It won't let you retire on a beach while drinking overpriced fruit juice out of a pineapple. What it gives you is something far more powerful. Proof that discipline works. Proof that rationality works. Proof that avoiding stupidity works, proof that you can control yourself in a world where most people can't control anything, not their spending, not their emotions, not even their appetites. Once you hit $100, you finally understand that wealth isn't magic. It's momentum. And now you have it. Let me explain why life suddenly feels easier after that number, even though the world around you hasn't changed one bit. Reason one, compounding finally becomes visible before 100,000, and compounding feels like fiction, a story old men repeat to make themselves sound wise. 10,000 earning 8%, you barely notice it. 50,000 earning 8%, you notice, but not enough to be impressed. 100,000 earning 8%, that's $8,000 while you slept. Once the numbers get big enough to be felt emotionally, the process becomes addictive finally in a rational way. American, you no longer fight compounding, you cooperate with it. The snowball no longer needs you to push it uphill. It starts rolling downhill on its own. And that shift, invisible but powerful, changes the way you see the world. Reason two, your discipline is no longer theoretical. Anyone can say they're disciplined. Most people do. But until you produce results, your discipline is just a flattering story you tell yourself. A 100,000 is the first moment where results and behavior align. You now have evidence that the years of restraint weren't pointless, that the sacrifices, the budgeting, the avoiding envy, the staying rational during market volatility, none of it was wasted. This creates a psychological shift. You stop asking, is this working? And start saying, I'd be a fool to stop now. And people who feel that way behave very differently from the dabblers who quit at the first sign of inconvenience. Reason three, you stop being desperate. Before 100,000, everything feels urgent. Your raises feel urgent. Market dips feel urgent. Every bad day feels like a catastrophe. Every distraction feels tempting. Once you have 100,000, desperation disappears. You gain something most people never achieve, a buffer between you and reality. That buffer buys you better thinking, resistance to panic, freedom from stupid risks, the ability to ignore noise, the strength to stick with a plan. People underestimate how much desperation hurts judgment. A desperate person is of rational investing. Once you're no longer desperate, your decisions finally improve. Reason four, you start rejecting nonsense automatically. Before 100,000, you're vulnerable to garbage ideas, get rich quick, double your money in passive income with no effort, sure things, stock picks, hedge your loss with crypto derivatives. Once you reach 100,000, these ideas stop sounding exciting. They start sounding ridiculous. You've seen what boring, consistent behavior produces. You no longer crave the thrill of gambling disguised as opportunity. Your filter becomes sharper. Your nonsense to detector becomes brutal. And your tolerance for stupidity, your own and others, drops to zero. This is called maturity. Most people never experience it. Reason five, the world stops feeling like an enemy. When you're broke, everything feels like it's against you. The bills, the rent, the market, the economy, the cost of living, the wealthy, your own lack of progress. Reaching 100,000 doesn't change the world, but it changes your position in it. You stop feeling hunted and start feeling capable. You stop saying, how will I survive, and start saying, how can I improve things from here? That psychological shift is enormous. It turns victims into adults and adults into wealth builders. Reason six, You stop confusing speed with success. Before 100,000 people obsess over shortcuts. They think wealth is a race. They think they're behind. They think they need to catch up. But once you hit 100,000, you realize something liberating. Wealth is not built rapidly. It's built relentlessly. Slow, steady progress suddenly feels more attractive than frantic risk taking because now you've seen progress in your own life. And once reality is on your side, fantasy loses its seduction. Reason 7, you finally understand yourself. Most people have no idea how weak their impulses are until money tests them. They overspend, they overact, they overtrade, they overestimate themselves, they underestimate risk. The journey to $100 exposes these flaws brutally. But once you reach that number, American, you understand your own nature far better than before. Maybe you learned you panic too easily, or that you envy your peer, that you chase stupid ideas during boredom, or that you get overconfident fast, or that you spend to impress people who don't care. The point is, America, you now know yourself, and a person who understands himself is impossible to stop. 100s, it doesn't change your identity. It clarifies it. That clarity is priceless. Reason 8, you finally see that wealth is a behavior, not a miracle. People think wealthy individuals know some secret. Here is the secret. Wealth is a side effect of not being stupid for a very long time. Once you hit 100,000, you realize this, and the game becomes simple. Not easy, but simple. Spend less than you earn. Invest in what you understand. Avoid imbu. Avoid overconfidence. Avoid stupidity. Everything after that is just time and compounding. And that brings us to the final point, the sharpest lesson of all. The sharpest lesson of all. If you can reach 100,000, you can reach 1,000,000, because the hard part wasn't the money. It was becoming the person who could earn it. And you already proved you can do